What happens when Anne Hathaway walks onto the set of The View expecting a light-hearted conversation about her latest project, only for Sunny Hostin to challenge her on live television in a way nobody saw coming. The audience thought they were about to see another polished celebrity interview. Instead, the atmosphere shifted in seconds, and what followed became one of the most talked-about moments daytime television had seen in months. Make sure to subscribe to the Star Talks, and like and comment for more talk show coverage. The cameras rolled as the audience applauded loudly while Anne walked onto the stage smiling, waving at the crowd, dressed elegantly but casually enough to match the daytime atmosphere. Whoopi Goldberg welcomed her warmly first. "Anne Hathaway is here." The audience erupted again while Anne laughed and placed a hand over her chest. "Oh wow, thank you, and said, "That is a very nice welcome for 10 in the morning." Everyone laughed immediately. The energy felt relaxed. Joy Behar leaned forward with her usual grin. "You'd be surprised what coffee and celebrity gossip can do to this audience." And laughed again. "Honestly, same." For the first several minutes, everything moved smoothly. The panel discussed Anne's recent interviews, balancing work and parenting, and how public perception of celebrities had changed over the years. Anne answered carefully but naturally, sounding thoughtful without sounding rehearsed. Sunny listened quietly for most of it, nodding occasionally while Anne explained how she had become more protective of her private life. "There was a period," Anne said, "where I felt like people had already decided who I was before I even opened my mouth. And after a while, you stop trying to win everybody over because you realize that's impossible." The audience applauded softly. Whoopi nodded. "That's experience talking right there." But Sunny tilted her head slightly. "Do you think some of that came from the way celebrities present themselves, though?" The audience became quieter instantly. Not tense yet, just attentive, and smiled politely. "What do you mean?" Sunny crossed her legs and leaned in slightly. "Well, there was a long period online where people talked about this idea that you came across as overly polished, like maybe too aware of your image." The audience reacted with a collective, "Oh." Joy immediately looked sideways. "Sunny is wasting no time today." Sunny laughed lightly. "No, I'm asking respectfully," and kept smiling, though her expression tightened for a split second. "No, I get it," and replied calmly. "I've heard that criticism before." Sunny continued, "Because it's interesting. People love authenticity now, and I think some viewers felt they didn't know the real Anne Hathaway for a long time." Whoopi looked at Sunny carefully. "That's a spicy way to start the morning." The audience laughed nervously and folded her hands together. "I actually think that says more about public expectations than it says about me." The crowd reacted immediately with applause. Sunny nodded slowly. "How so?" And remained composed. "Because men in Hollywood can be polished, media-trained, careful, ambitious, and people call them professional. Women do it and suddenly they're fake." The audience exploded with applause and a few people stood briefly clapping. Joy leaned back. "Okay, she came prepared." Sunny smiled but didn't back down. "That's fair. But some people would say it wasn't about professionalism. They felt there was a disconnect." And nodded again. "And I understand that. But I also think people forget celebrities are reacting to pressure in real time. When every sentence gets analyzed online for 10 years, you become cautious." Whoopi pointed toward Anne. "Exactly." Sunny turned toward Whoopi. "But caution can also read as calculation." Another wave of reactions rolled through the audience. And looked directly at Sunny now. Not angry. Focused. "I think women especially are expected to perform relatability constantly," and said. "You have to be successful but not too proud. Beautiful but not aware of it. Confident but never too confident." The audience applauded again. Sunny responded quickly. "But isn't that part of fame? Audiences connect with vulnerability." And smiled slightly. "Sure. But vulnerability on demand isn't vulnerability. Sometimes it's performance." That line changed the mood completely. The audience reacted loudly. Several people clapped harder than before. Joy actually pointed at Anne with widened eyes. "Oh, that was good." Sunny laughed, though there was visible tension now. "No, seriously," Sunny said. "That's actually interesting," and relaxed a little into her chair. "I'm not saying audiences are wrong for wanting authenticity. I just think there's pressure on public women to constantly prove they deserve affection." Whoopi nodded slowly. "That's true." Sunny still looked unconvinced. "But didn't you also benefit from that polished image for years?" And answered immediately. "Of course. Absolutely." I benefited from studio systems, media coaching, fashion campaigns, all of it. I'm not pretending otherwise. The audience quieted because now the conversation sounded more serious than entertaining. But, and continued, there's also a punishment that comes with it, especially once people decide you're too polished. Then suddenly every smile becomes fake. Every answer becomes calculated. And eventually people stop seeing a human being. There was a pause. Joy softly said, "That's probably hard to live through," and looked at her and nodded honestly. It was. The audience clapped gently again. Sunny looked down briefly at her cards before speaking again. "I'll admit something. There was a time I didn't fully understand the backlash you got either." The audience became very attentive again. Sunny continued carefully. "But over the years I started wondering if social media creates these narratives around women that become impossible to escape." And gave a small smile. "That's exactly what happened." Whoopi jumped in. "And people pile on because it becomes trendy." "Yes," and said. "And once a narrative sticks, people look for proof everywhere." Joy nodded dramatically. "That's true for everybody now. Politics, celebrities, television hosts." Sunny laughed. "You saying they attack us too?" Joy threw her hands up. "Every day." The audience laughed loudly, finally easing some tension. But Sunny turned back to Anne again. "Do you think there's any responsibility on celebrities, though, to be more open?" And thought carefully before answering. "I think honesty matters," she said. "But I also think boundaries matter. I learned the hard way that if you give the public every piece of yourself, eventually you don't know what belongs to you anymore." That line drew another strong audience reaction. Whoopi leaned back quietly. Sunny studied, and for a second before speaking more softly this time. "You know what's interesting? You're much more direct than people expected you to be." The audience laughed immediately because everyone understood what she meant. And laughed too. "I've heard that today." Sunny smiled. "No, but seriously. I think people watching right now are probably seeing a different side of you." And looked out toward the audience briefly. "I hope they're just seeing a person." That earned the loudest applause yet. For a moment, the conversation finally relaxed again. Joy made a joke about online criticism. Whoopi teased Sunny for trying to start a daytime war before lunch. The audience laughed comfortably again. But the tension wasn't completely gone. Sunny leaned forward once more. "Can I ask one more uncomfortable question?" The audience instantly reacted again. And laughed nervously. "That introduction alone scares me." Sunny smiled. No, it's fair. You've talked about public judgment. But some critics say celebrities only call out toxic media culture once it affects them personally." The audience went silent again. Whoopi glanced sideways immediately, like she knew the conversation was entering dangerous territory, and took a breath before answering. "That's probably true for some people," she admitted. "Sometimes you don't fully understand a system until it hurts you." Sunny nodded slowly. "So did it change how you view fame?" And answered without hesitation. "It changed how I view empathy." The audience became completely quiet, and continued calmly. "Because once you experience millions of strangers reducing you to headlines, assumptions, memes, or trends, you become a lot slower to judge other people." Whoopi softly said, "That's real." Sunny looked thoughtful now instead of confrontational, and continued, "And honestly, I think we've created a culture where people enjoy tearing women down until they become symbols instead of people." A woman in the audience shouted, "Exactly." Everyone laughed briefly, but the applause afterward was intense. Sunny finally leaned back in her chair. "Well, I can admit when somebody makes a strong point." Joy jumped in immediately. "Write this day down." The audience roared with laughter while Sunny rolled her eyes jokingly. And laughed harder now, visibly more relaxed after the emotional intensity of the conversation. But even as the segment moved toward commercial break, the energy in the room had clearly changed. What started as a normal celebrity interview had turned into something much deeper, more personal, and far more uncomfortable than anyone expected when the cameras first started rolling. When the show returned from commercial, the audience was still buzzing. You could hear it in the room. People weren't settling back into their seats the way they normally did after a break. They were whispering. Some were still discussing Anne's last answer. A few were shaking their heads like they couldn't believe how direct that exchange had become. The camera came back to the panel, and even the hosts looked different. The smiles were smaller. The energy was tighter. Whoopi Goldberg glanced at the audience and smiled knowingly. "Well," she said, "if you're just joining us, you picked a very interesting time to tune in. The crowd laughed. And Hathaway laughed too, but this time there was something more measured in it. The easy warmth from the beginning of the interview had shifted. Not negatively, but everybody now understood this wasn't just a celebrity plugging a movie. This had become a real conversation. Whoopi turned back toward Anne. You know, one thing I respect is that you didn't dodge any of that. And nodded. I've spent enough years trying to dodge things, she said. It doesn't really work. That got a laugh. Joy Behar jumped in immediately. See, that's what I like. Because sometimes celebrities come here, and they've got these answers prepared. You ask them something real, and suddenly they sound like a press release. The audience laughed louder, and pointed at Joy. That's actually my nightmare. Joy laughed. No, seriously, and continued. You spend years doing press tours, and eventually you can hear yourself becoming robotic. Sunny raised an eyebrow. So were you robotic? The audience reacted instantly. Another, oh, and laughed. That was smooth. Sunny smiled. But I'm serious. And leaned back thoughtfully. Yes, she said plainly. The room went quiet again. There were definitely years where I was performing a version of myself. Sunny nodded slowly. And why? And answered immediately. Fear. That word landed heavily. Nobody interrupted. And continued. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Fear of becoming a headline. Fear of disappointing people. Fear of being misunderstood. She looked down briefly before continuing. And honestly, fear of being disliked. The audience softened. You could feel the empathy in the room now. Sunny looked at her differently. Less like a host challenging a guest. More like someone genuinely listening. That's surprising to hear, Sunny admitted. And smiled. Why? Because from the outside, Sunny said, you always looked confident. And laughed quietly. That's because confidence photographs well. That line drew immediate applause. Whoopi nodded. That's a fact. And continued. But confidence and comfort are not the same thing. Sunny repeated it. Confidence and comfort. And nodded. I could stand on a red carpet in front of 200 cameras and look perfectly fine. Then go home and replay every sentence I said for 3 hours. Several audience members murmured in recognition. Joy leaned forward. That sounds exhausting. It was, and admitted. Sunny crossed her arms thoughtfully. Do you think women in your position have to overthink more than men? And didn't hesitate. Yes. The audience applauded. She continued. And I don't think that's controversial. Whoopi nodded. It's not. And looked toward the audience. When men are assertive, they're powerful. When women are assertive, they're difficult. Loud applause. When men protect their privacy, they're mysterious. When women do it, they're hiding something. More applause. When men set boundaries, they're disciplined. When women do it, they're cold. Now the audience was fully with her. People were clapping before she even finished. Sunny let that reaction sit for a moment. Then she asked something that shifted the conversation again. Do you think you've ever been misunderstood by women more than men? That caught Anne off guard. It showed. She paused longer than before. That's a very good question. Sunny nodded. And thought carefully. Yes, she finally said. The audience quieted again. And that hurt more. Sunny leaned in. Why? Because I expected better from us. That answer stunned the room. Even Joy stopped moving. And clarified quickly. I don't mean all women, obviously. But there were moments where I felt judged more harshly by women than by men. And that confused me. Sunny nodded slowly. Internalized expectations. Exactly, and said. We sometimes enforce impossible standards on each other. The audience applauded again. Whoopi looked at Sunny. Now that's a conversation. Sunny agreed. It is. And continued. There's this unspoken rule sometimes that women have to be relatable at all times. You can't be too polished, too ambitious, too emotional, too guarded, too successful. Joy interrupted. And if you are, somebody online starts a thread about it. The audience laughed hard. And laughed too. Exactly. Sunny smiled. You really do know the internet. And laughed. I've survived it. That got a bigger laugh. But Sunny wasn't finished. She leaned in again. I want to challenge one thing, though. The room reacted immediately. Whoopi laughed. You really woke up choosing confrontation today. Sunny ignored it. And a lot of people watching would say, okay, celebrities talk about pressure, but they also have extraordinary privilege. And nodded immediately. That's true. Sunny continued. You have wealth, influence, access, opportunities most people will never have. And nodded again. Yes. So, how do you talk about pain without sounding disconnected from ordinary people? The audience got quiet. That was the sharpest question yet. Even took an extra breath. Then she answered carefully. By not pretending my pain is bigger than theirs. That changed the room. People clapped instantly. And continued. My challenges are real. But so are everyone else's. She gestured toward the audience. The mother working 2 jobs is carrying something heavy. Applause. The student drowning in debt is carrying something heavy. More applause. The person struggling quietly and smiling through it is carrying something heavy. Now the audience was fully engaged. And looked back at Sunny. My life is privilege. That's undeniable. But privilege doesn't erase humanity. That line hit. Hard. Even Sunny nodded slowly. That's fair. Whoopi smiled. That's very fair. Joy looked at Anne. Can I ask something less serious before Sunny makes us all cry? The audience laughed loudly. Sunny laughed too. Please do. Joy turned dramatically toward Anne. What's the weirdest rumor you've ever heard about yourself? And burst out laughing. Oh wow. She looked up like she was choosing from too many. There was one that said I refused to make eye contact with people because I thought it preserved my energy. The audience exploded laughing. Joy nearly fell backward. What? And laughed harder. I know. Sunny laughed. That's absurd. And nodded. And the funniest part is I actually make too much eye contact. The audience laughed again. Whoopi looked at Anne. That one's true. You've been staring directly into our souls all morning. Huge laughter. The tension broke again. But only briefly. Sunny smiled. Okay, one final thing. The audience immediately reacted. Joy threw her hands up. There's never one final thing. Sunny laughed. No, this is different. She turned fully toward Anne. You've been very honest today. More honest than people probably expected. And nodded. I think so. Sunny continued. So I want to ask something personal. The room quieted. Anne's expression shifted slightly. Okay. Sunny looked directly at her. What hurt more, the criticism itself, or feeling like people had already decided who you were? Silence. No laughter. No movement. Anne's face changed. For the first time all interview, emotion visibly hit her. She looked down. Then back up. That one. Her voice was quieter. The second one. Nobody interrupted. And continued. Criticism hurts, sure. But criticism can teach you something. She paused. What hurts is when people stop seeing you as changeable. The audience listened intensely. When they decide your story is finished. Her voice cracked slightly. And they never let you write another chapter. That moment stopped the room. Sunny's expression softened immediately. Whoopi looked at Anne carefully. Joy stopped smiling. The audience went silent. And took a breath. You know what's strange? Nobody answered. The people closest to me never saw what the internet saw. She smiled faintly. My husband didn't. Adam Schulman was referenced warmly. My friends didn't. My family didn't. She shrugged. But millions of strangers felt certain. That line hit hard. A woman in the audience whispered, Wow. Sunny looked genuinely moved. That's painful. And nodded. It was. Then she smiled again. But it also taught me something important. Sunny asked quietly, What? And looked out toward the crowd. You cannot build your identity out of other people's opinions. Applause exploded. Huge applause. People stood. Whoopi clapped. Joy clapped. Even Sunny clapped. And smiled through it. And for the first time that morning, she looked completely at ease. Not polished. Not careful. Not media trained. Just real. And that was exactly when Sunny decided to ask one more question. The one that would turn the entire interview in a direction nobody expected. The applause continued for several seconds longer than normal, and even after it faded, the energy in the studio stayed heavy. Not uncomfortable exactly, but emotional. The audience had stopped watching a celebrity interview and started witnessing something more personal. And sat quietly for a moment, still smiling softly after her last answer, while Sunny looked down briefly like she was replaying the conversation in her head. Whoopi finally broke the silence. Well, she said slowly, this turned into group therapy real fast. The audience laughed loudly, grateful for the release of tension. And laughed too, touching her chest lightly. I didn't expect this either. Joy leaned toward her. You thought you were here to talk about movies. I really did. Sunny smiled now, more relaxed than before. To be fair, we still can. And laughed. Please. Save me. The audience laughed again. Whoopi shuffled her cards dramatically. All right, back to Hollywood before everybody starts crying. The conversation shifted for a few minutes into Anne's upcoming project, and the atmosphere softened again. And talked about balancing serious roles with lighter films, and joked about how exhausting press tours had become. At this point, she said, half my career is answering the same 5 questions in different outfits. Joy immediately responded, that's television too. Sunny added, except we don't get designer gowns. Joy pointed at Sunny. Speak for yourself. The audience roared with laughter, and relaxed more visibly now. Her shoulders dropped, her answers came faster, and there was less caution in her voice. The tension from earlier had created a strange kind of trust at the table. But then the conversation shifted again. Sunny looked toward Anne thoughtfully. You know what's interesting, though? And smiled carefully. Whenever someone starts with that sentence, I get nervous. Big laugh. Sunny grinned. No, seriously. Earlier you talked about how women are judged differently in Hollywood. But some people watching might say successful celebrities still benefit from systems regular people don't. The room sharpened again, and nodded slowly. Absolutely. Sunny continued. So when celebrities talk about pressure or criticism, there are viewers who think, you're rich, famous, successful. How bad can it really be? A few audience members murmured in agreement, and didn't react defensively. Instead, she nodded again. I understand that reaction. Sunny looked slightly surprised by how quickly and agreed, and leaned forward. I know my life comes with extraordinary privilege. I'm not confused about that. The audience listened closely. But pain isn't canceled out by success, and continued. Mental health doesn't suddenly disappear because someone won an Oscar or lives in a nice house. The audience applauded. Whoopi nodded immediately. That's true, and continued calmly. And honestly, fame creates a strange isolation sometimes. People stop talking to you normally. Joy laughed. Because everybody wants something. And pointed at her. Exactly. Sunny tilted her head. So how do you know who's genuine? And smiled faintly. You don't always. The audience quieted again, and looked down briefly before continuing. There were periods where I became suspicious of kindness because I couldn't tell whether people liked me or liked access to me. That line hit hard. Sunny nodded slowly. That sounds lonely, and smiled sadly. It can be. Whoopi looked toward the audience. And this is the part people don't think about. Sunny turned slightly toward Whoopi. But celebrities also create distance sometimes. And jumped in before the tone shifted too sharply. That's true too. Sunny looked back at her. You agree with that? Yes, and said immediately. Some famous people build walls because they're scared. Others build them because they start believing they're more important than everyone else. The audience reacted loudly to that honesty. Joy raised her eyebrows dramatically. Now she's talking. And laughed. No, but really. Fame changes people. Sometimes in good ways. Sometimes not. Sunny leaned forward again. Did it change you? And paused. That question landed differently. Not confrontational. Personal. She thought carefully before answering. Yes. The audience stayed silent. And continued. I think it made me more anxious for a long time. Sunny nodded slowly. Because of public scrutiny? Partly, and said. But also because you become hyper-aware that every mistake becomes permanent. Whoopi quietly said, That's hard. And looked toward her. It changes the way you move through the world. Sunny crossed her arms thoughtfully. Do you ever miss anonymity? And laughed immediately. Oh my God, yes. The audience laughed with her. And shook her head. I miss going somewhere without thinking about cameras. I miss saying something stupid without wondering if it'll become a headline. Joy grinned. That's impossible here too. Sunny laughed. Especially here. And smiled, but then her tone became more serious again. I think social media intensified all of this. The audience murmured. And continued. People aren't just public figures anymore. They're content. That line got a strong reaction. Sunny nodded immediately. That's true. And leaned back slightly. And once people become content, empathy starts disappearing. Everything becomes entertainment. Every mistake becomes a meme. Every awkward moment becomes a trend. Whoopi pointed toward Anne. She's not wrong. Sunny looked toward the audience. But some people would argue celebrities benefit from social media too. And nodded. Absolutely we do. She didn't hesitate. It gives us platforms, opportunities, connection. But it also creates this constant pressure to package yourself into something consumable. Joy made a face. That sounds exhausting. It is exhausting, Anne admitted. The audience applauded lightly. Sunny studied and carefully again. You seem much more comfortable speaking openly now than you used to. And smiled. I think I spent too many years trying to sound perfect. The audience reacted immediately and laughed softly at herself. And the irony is people connect more when you stop doing that. Sunny nodded. That's probably true. And looked directly at her. I think people can sense fear. The room got quiet again and continued. And for years, I was terrified of being disliked. That honesty shifted the mood completely. Not dramatic. Human. Whoopi leaned back slowly. That's real. Sunny's tone softened again. What changed? And thought for a second before answering. I got older. I became a mother. I experienced failure. I experienced backlash. And eventually I realized surviving public opinion teaches you that it can't define you forever unless you let it. The audience applauded loudly. Joy pointed at Anne. That's the quote right there. The audience laughed. But Sunny wasn't finished. Do you think Hollywood is getting better for women? And inhaled slowly. Some parts of it are. Sunny waited. And smiled knowingly. But women are still judged more harshly for confidence than men are. Audience applause. Sunny nodded slowly. And aging. And laughed instantly. Oh, definitely aging. Joy jumped in dramatically. Tell me about it. Huge laughter. And continued smiling. There's still pressure for women to remain endlessly appealing in impossible ways. Sunny responded quickly. But don't female celebrities also reinforce those standards sometimes? That question changed the energy again. Whoopi looked over carefully. The audience reacted with a louder, "Oh," this time, and didn't answer immediately. She looked thoughtful. Then she nodded. Yes, we do. The audience became quiet and sat forward slightly. And that's something I've had to examine in myself too. Sunny watched closely and continued carefully. There are ways women in entertainment unintentionally participate in harmful systems because we're trying to survive them. That answer visibly surprised Sunny. You really believe that? I do, Anne said honestly. Sometimes we adapt to unhealthy expectations without realizing we're helping normalize them. Whoopi nodded slowly. That's deep, and shrugged lightly. It's complicated. Sunny looked impressed, now more than confrontational. You know, I expected you to be guarded today. And laughed. I was. For about 7 minutes. The audience exploded with laughter. Even Sunny laughed hard at that. Joy pointed between them. This interview started like a courtroom. Whoopi added. And now everybody's confessing. And covered her face laughing. But Sunny looked at Anne again, more serious now. I'm glad you didn't stay guarded. The room quieted once more. And smiled warmly. Me too. And for the first time since the interview started, the tension between them was completely gone. The audience applauded softly after Anne's last comment, but the energy in the room had changed completely from where it started. What began as a tense celebrity interview had turned into something unusually honest for daytime television. Whoopi looked across the table and smiled. You know what I like about this conversation? And looked over. What? Whoopi shrugged. Nobody ran from the uncomfortable parts. The audience applauded immediately. Sunny nodded in agreement. That's true. Joy leaned back dramatically. I did. Several times. Huge laughter broke across the studio. And laughed harder than she had all morning, visibly lighter now than when she first walked out on stage. Sunny smiled at her. You know, people are probably going to be talking about this interview all day. And grinned. That makes me nervous. Joy waved her hand dismissively. Everything trends now. I sneezed wrong once and ended up online for 2 days. The audience burst into laughter again. But Sunny turned serious one last time. I do think conversations like this matter, though. The audience quieted. Sunny looked directly at Anne. Because there are probably viewers watching who've also been misunderstood publicly. Maybe not on a celebrity level, but in their families, jobs, relationships online. And hearing someone talk honestly about surviving judgment probably resonates. Anne's expression softened again. I hope so. Whoopi nodded slowly. I think everybody knows what it feels like to be reduced to one version of themselves. That line hit the room hard, and quietly responded exactly. There was a brief silence before Joy clapped her hands together suddenly. Well, before we all end up emotional again, let's talk about something shallow. The audience laughed loudly. Joy looked at Anne. How does it feel being one of those people who somehow never ages? and immediately covered her face laughing. Oh no! Sunny laughed too. See, this is why we can't stay serious for too long. And shook her head smiling. I promise you, lighting and expensive moisturizer are carrying this entire operation. The audience roared. Whoopi pointed at her. Now that sounded authentic. Big applause followed. The conversation loosened again for the final segment, and joked about parenting disasters, terrible audition stories early in her career, and accidentally embarrassing herself at award shows. At one point, Joy asked, "What's the most awkward celebrity interaction you've ever had?" and groaned immediately. Oh, I can't say names. The audience reacted loudly. Sunny leaned in. That means it's good. And laughed. Let's just say there was a very famous actor who completely forgot we'd already met 3 times. Joy yelled, "That's Hollywood," and nodded dramatically. 3 times. The audience laughed again. But underneath the lighter moments, there was still awareness of what had happened earlier. The interview had gone somewhere unexpectedly emotional, and everybody knew it. As the segment neared its end, Whoopi turned toward and one final time. "I'm glad you came on," and smiled warmly. "Me too." Whoopi nodded. "And I appreciate that you answered everything honestly," and glanced toward Sunny briefly before responding. "Well, I appreciated the questions." The audience reacted immediately with applause. Sunny smiled back at her. "I think people underestimate audiences sometimes. They can tell when something's real." And nodded. "They absolutely can." Whoopi looked toward the camera. And that's why conversations matter. The applause grew louder again. As the show wrapped, the host stood with, and while the audience cheered. The cameras caught Sunny, Anne, and sharing another quick exchange off-mic before hugging briefly, which immediately got another reaction from the crowd. Joy pointed dramatically at them. "Look at this. Peace has been restored." Huge laughter filled the studio one last time. The show faded to commercial with and waving to the audience, smiling in a way that looked far more relaxed than when she first walked out onto the stage. But what happened after the show became even bigger than the interview itself. Within minutes, clips from the conversation exploded online. One clip in particular spread everywhere, and calmly saying, "Vulnerability on demand isn't vulnerability. Sometimes it's performance." Another viral moment came when she said, "If I stayed angry, then they'd still control part of my story." People across social media began debating the interview almost instantly. Some viewers praised Sunny for asking difficult questions instead of doing a generic celebrity interview. Others praised and for staying composed under pressure while still being emotionally honest. Many fans said it was the most authentic daytime television moment they'd seen in years. Entertainment pages began posting headlines within hours. Comment sections exploded with debates about celebrity culture, internet backlash, and how women in Hollywood are treated publicly. Several viewers admitted they had participated in negative online narratives about Anne years earlier, and now regretted it after hearing her perspective directly. Others defended Sunny's approach, saying the conversation only became meaningful because she challenged and instead of protecting her. By that evening, short clips from the interview had millions of views across multiple platforms. Even celebrities quietly reacted online. A few actresses posted supportive comments about and discussing public scrutiny honestly. Former talk show guests commented on how difficult live television can become when conversations unexpectedly turn personal. Meanwhile, fans of The View called it one of the strongest interviews the show had produced in a long time because the disagreement never became disrespectful. That became the biggest takeaway. The tension felt real. The disagreement felt real. But so did the resolution. The next morning, entertainment reporters discussed the interview again, replaying the most intense moments repeatedly. One panel debated whether celebrity interviews should become more honest like this instead of staying overly controlled. Another segment focused on Anne's comments about social media turning human beings into content. And viewers continued sharing clips with captions like, "She handled that perfectly." Sunny asked what everyone was thinking. This is the Anne Hathaway people never got to see before. More interviews like this, please. Even people who normally never watched daytime talk shows started searching for the full segment because of how widely the clips circulated online. By the end of the week, the interview was still trending. Not because of screaming. Not because someone walked off stage. Not because of fake drama. But because 2 people sat across from each other on live television, disagreed honestly, and still treated each other like human beings by the end of it. And strangely enough, that felt more shocking to viewers than any explosive argument could have been, and later briefly referenced the interview during another appearance, joking, "I survived." The audience there laughed immediately. But then she added something more serious. "I think people are hungry for real conversations now." That quote spread online too. As for Sunny, she addressed the reaction during a later episode by saying, "Good conversations can be uncomfortable. That doesn't make them bad." That clip circulated almost as much as the original interview itself. And for weeks afterward, fans continued debating who won the exchange. But most viewers eventually reached the same conclusion. Nobody won. That was the point. It wasn't a fight. It was a real conversation between strong personalities willing to challenge each other honestly in front of millions of people. And in today's television landscape, that kind of authenticity stood out more than rehearsed perfection ever could. Share your opinion in the comments and subscribe to the Star Talks for more real talk show stories.